Welcome to the D-VELO-P Cycling Training Podcast, where we untangle the complexities of peak performance in cycling. My name is Fredrik Eriksson, and together with my partner in crime, Erik Åkesson, we are the dorky coaching duo who will be your hosts. All right, hello and welcome to a brand new episode of our cycling training podcast. My name is Fredrik.
And I'm Eric this week too. And
Yet again.
We have a new study again that we're going to talk about. Last week was about road cycling and the monuments. And this week we dive into another type of cycling, the physiology of contemporary Olympic cross-country mountain biking, a systematic review. And this study is from Gabriel Protzen and his colleagues in Spain, and was published this year in 2026.
So it's brand new, hot off the press.
Hot off the press, exactly. Last week was pre-printed, and this is hot off the press. So we dive right straight into them. But of course, this is a systematic review, meaning it is a study that looks at other studies and draw conclusions from what other studies have published.
Yeah, and this one specifically looks into Olympic cross-country mountain biking, which is a cycling discipline that we, of course, are very fond of, as well as most of cycling's disciplines.
Yeah, it's probably the discipline that you and I have most experience from as well, at least from my side.
Could be, yeah.
Could be, yeah.
And I think it also, this one also looks a little bit, makes a historical comparison between how the Olympic cross-country format was back in the days, and in this case meaning before 2011 and earlier, and then how it has evolved in the last, and become the last 15 years.
Yeah, and in this study, they included 53 studies that involved national to elite level XCO athletes competing under the current race format, which is from 2011 until now, where the races are a bit shorter, a bit punchier, and is a little bit different physiological demands than before that. And they included tier 3, tier 4, and tier 5 cyclists. So these are good cyclists from good nationally good to world class.
Yeah, and they had I think they managed to get fairly a lot of studies, and like you said, 53. They did make a note that Olympic cross country, which is the sole Olympic discipline in mountain biking, they write like this: it remains among the least studied Olympic sports, which I agree. That I think mountain biking in general is a cycling discipline and a sport in general that is quite underdeveloped in comparison to how many people actually participate in this sport. And we can always make the comparison with road cycling, which is a bigger discipline, but in comparison to how much bigger it is, it gets a lot more attention from research. But on the other hand, I think a lot of cycling research that is not XCO specific, that it's only made for cross country, it has quite a big application in XCO. So it is quite a research sport, but that is mainly thanks to its bigger brother, road cycling.
Yeah, of course, and it's easy to include the ergometer in the lab to do studies in that as well. It is quite tricky, I believe, to do VO2 max and lactate and other stuff on the XCO course. It can be done. They have done it in this study or the studies they reference to, but it is a bit harder with a lot more potential for failures or limitations.
And also, I think mountain biking is a bit trickier sport to study the profile, like what capacity or physiological capacity you need to be good, because is a pretty big technical component, which both is difficult to measure and also makes it a bit more messy to do field studies on cross-country mountain biking.
Yeah, should we dive into it? If we compare the old school XCO races, where the duration typically was ranging from 120 to 135 minutes for men and 105 to 120 minutes for women, until now, where they target around 80 to 100 minutes, depending on which type of race it is, if it's a World Cup or a lower level races.
Yeah, I was when I read that, it took me back to my days as a cross-country rider in the 90s, and I went back and looked at the results from the under 23 World Championships in cross country in here in Sweden in Åre, which I raced, and the
1999.
in 1999, and the winner of the under 23 race had a winning time of 2 hours 19 minutes, and already at place 10 you were at 2 hours 34 minutes, I think, and I think I had like 2 hours 43 minutes or something like that for the race, and we're talking about an under 23 race here, which now are around 75 minutes.
Yeah. And you also mentioned some of the names in that result list with Cadel Evans, Julian
He
Absalon,
was
and Jose Hermida. Cadel Evans was second, I think you said.
Yeah, I think Jose was eighth or ninth or something like that, and I think Julian Absalon actually was fifth.
Yeah. So it was pretty good riders, and then Fredrik Eriksson as well, though.
Exactly, there were some really spectacular riders, and
And you. uh, no, but they say that these modifications of racing and the race times may have influenced the technical and physiological profiles of the XCO riders, which makes it difficult to compare. It makes it difficult to use older studies on XCO uh, and use the applicability of the findings from that studies to this one.
yeah, it is a bit of a different sport today than it was back then, and we can dive into the details of that. We're going to dive into the
Yeah,
details of that. But I think one interesting thing to start with is their table one in the study here, which looks into the characteristics of the male and female riders in the three tiers. And if you only look at the tier 5 riders,
the best one.
uh, the best ones, they are the guys are around 66 kilos and 179 centimeters long, and the women are 56 kilos and 162 centimeters long. So pretty minute people. It's not the biggest, so they're pretty pretty small riders compared to other disciplines, specifically if you look into like road cycling, which is, I mean, you have a lot of riders that are plus 80 with for certain types of, but
And a lot
mountain
of riders sub 60 as well.
exactly. So you have a bigger variation. Of course, you have big riders in XU as well. Charlie Aldridge is the most recent contemporary
Yeah.
exception from this, but this is I mean it's been like this pretty much from the start. The sizes of the riders, and then it was interesting to see that the male riders had a VO2 max of about 82, and
Yeah.
the females 64. We're going to talk a little bit about the female values, but and then the males the maximal aerobic power is 446, which is quite high, and that's 6.6 per kilo. I was actually a little bit surprised
Yes.
how low the threshold was, 345 watts, which is 5.2 watts per kilo. And I'm not sure that is, maybe it is like that nowadays, but I had expected higher um, for that values for men. And also with the peak power, which was 1161 for men, which is 17.9 or almost 18 watts per kilo. I had actually expected that to be a little bit higher as well, considering that the discipline has become even more punchy.
Yeah, and since they are pretty lean and small cyclists as well, the watt per kg should be a bit higher. I would expect as well. But if they had like LT2 or critical power of 345, they also say above this that they spent about 25% of the time of the race uh, above that. So well, if you have a lower critical power or LT2, you can spend more time over it than if you have a higher.
Yeah, of course. And I mean, it's also important to know that how they have defined tier 5, which is international. And when you say international, at least my mind goes to people who are top, well, at least top 40 in the elite World Cup, and maybe top 20 and the under 23. Then you're a tier 5 kind of rider. But it could be that they have included anyone who is riding international races, and then of course that is going to drag down the values a little bit.
Yeah, exactly. And you mentioned the female values as well, which is 64 for in the VO2 max for women. And we talked earlier that we actually know someone that is a prior Olympic gold medalist that has a lot higher both VO2 max and maximal aerobic power, and in both absolute watts and watts per kg.
Yeah, I mean, we had Jenny as Riswitz as a guest on our podcast a few weeks back.
Yeah.
And we're quite familiar with her values, and it's significantly higher than the values reported here, where the maximal aerobic power is 286 watts per kilo, which is 5.2 watts per kilo. And let's just say that 5.2 is actually lower than Jenny has at threshold. So I'm guessing and this is the problem is that they don't have that many values from
Sure.
female cyclists. So of course, I mean, Jenny is the current world champion, the reigning world
Best
champion.
of the best.
So of course, those are going to be the best values. So it's probably not, you don't need that to be a top 10 rider, but it's significantly higher than reported here.
Yeah, exactly. But as we know, cross-country mountain biking is not only about power. It is also a lot of the technical sections where pedaling may not at all be required. But as we know, it is very technical sections, both uphill, downhill, and on the flats. So even in non-pedaling conditions, maintaining control and speed through obstacles imposes very high physiological stress as well. And this also results in that the heart rate doesn't drop as it usually does in the descents, and of course the VO2 max or the VO2 stays high throughout the race. So as a consequence of this, the riders typically have a mean heart rate of around 90% of their max.
For
So it is,
for the race, yeah.
for the whole race. So it is a very high demanding cardiorespiratory discipline.
Yeah, and like you said, not all of that cardiorespiratory load comes from pedaling. It's
Uh,
a lot of bike handling, pumping, and just holding on to the bike and so on in rough terrain. But if you only look at the pedaling side as well, it is very stochastic. Uh, they dive into that the most of the efforts are 1 to 5 seconds long when it comes to the pedaling. You don't pedal much more than 1 to 5 seconds before there's a little bit of a stop in the pedaling. And actually, they looked into like one of the studies they included had looked at a race typically was made up of 334 efforts above maximal aerobic power, which were 4.3 seconds in duration average and had 10.9 seconds of kind of rest between them, which is not rest because you're handling your bike in other types of ways or pedaling more easily during those 10.9 seconds.
Yeah, and if you only visualize or imagine what this means on maybe on a stationary bike, you do a very hard, not maximal sprint, but a hard sprint for 4 seconds, and then rest around 10 seconds between, and do this continuously for 75 minutes or 334 times. You will be pretty tired, and just imagine trying to handle the bike at the same time.
Yeah. And we've done a session that quite resembles this, doing 5 second sprints with 25 seconds easy pedaling between, and doing 90 of those, so 45 minutes, which is, if you tried it, it's long enough.
And you say it's easy pedaling, but we do want to have some push in the pedals. But
Yeah,
the first 10 minutes it's pretty good when you want to rest, but forcing the the pedals around.
yeah, and if you've done 47 of those sprints and you realize you have 43 more to go, it's quite a mentally challenging workout. But I actually, as I've told you before, I've done that workout at the sports
Lab.
lab we have at the college here, and it was quite interesting that if you only looked at heart rate, lactate, and VO2 max from those 45 minutes when I did that, you would have thought I did a 45 minutes time trial
Yeah.
because heart rate was stable, lactate was around, I think, 4.7 or 5.3 or something like that, pretty stable, and VO2 max also was stable at around 90% of VO2 max. So this kind of shows how cardiorespiratory, the aerobic load is the same, but as a time trial, but it's a much more stochastic nature in power output.
Yeah, and you told me after you did that effort, that was one of the hardest one you've ever done.
That was terrible, but it
And
was.
then you put it in our schedule
Then I made all the athletes around here try it as well, of course.
multiple times.
Yeah, but it's fun, of course.
Yeah, it's
Yes.
fun to have done it, to experience it, but when you've done 70 of them, it's not that fun.
Well, the last 20 are pretty nice again. It's the hard part is from 40 to 70. Those
or,
30 are the worst.
or 10 to 80.
Yeah.
Now, but back to the study, they also mentioned that the power output during these efforts remained relatively stable throughout the race, but the numbers of efforts decreased per lap, if you count per lap. So you did fewer of them, but you produced the same amount of power output during these efforts.
And I think that's really interesting. We can slide over a little bit to pacing strategy, because
Yeah,
that's also something they talk about, and which we talked about a few episodes back, and especially how important, not only looking at pacing during very steady state efforts from A to B, but when the course or the conditions or your the athletes you're riding against, your opponents do some things, how pacing changes, how you have to adapt pacing all the time. And this is, of course, a super, not extreme, but one of the more extreme in cycling, where, I mean, cross country mountain biking is the terrain is so different all the time that you have to pace yourself according to the terrain. So it's really interesting to see that when you get tired, you don't have the ability to do those short, hard bursts that we know is key to keeping a high speed in technical terrain, because you only have like a few seconds of putting in power before the next obstacle. And when you're tired and you start skipping those bursts that you have a few seconds or a few pedal strokes, that's when you start losing speed in terrain.
Yeah, and that's pretty interesting as well, since if we look at lap times, the best riders, even if they decrease the amount of times, amount of numbers of efforts per lap, they can even go faster, meaning they maintain speed over obstacles better in the last part of the races, maybe because they are tired and don't have the capacity to produce power, and therefore try to maintain a more, what can you say, solid line.
But I think it's actually, I think those things, those data in this article comes from two different research articles. One
Yeah.
look, yeah, so I think the best riders probably don't have that decrease in short bursts, whereas everybody else do, and that's
Yeah.
why they can go faster the last lap when they still do that and might maybe be even more dialed in for in the course as well. Because I mean, of course you do a lot of course checking before a cross country race, but you do a lot of course checking during the race, and you get more and more dialed in for the conditions and the lines for that day during the race, which also makes it makes it possible to go faster because you're technically a little bit more proficient when it comes to line choices
Yeah.
at the end of the race.
Yes. And as we talked about, the heart rate remained high, uh, hovering around 90% of the maximal heart rate during the whole race. And they didn't significantly fluctuate between laps. And I think this was pretty interesting that the one study found that uh, athletes spend around 15% of the almost 70-minute race below the first ventilatory threshold, uh, about 52% between VT1 and VT2, and around 33% above VT2. So it is a bigger variance between ventilation compared to heart rate that stays high.
Mm. Yeah, I think that's probably also that small variation in heart rate, and not that big in ventilation either, is also reflected in the lactate concentration, which is actually starts a little bit higher and then decreases, probably because they fatigue and can't produce as much lactate. That's one reason at least. But the mean values ranges from around 6 to 7 millimole over the race, which is usually, like we said, around 90 minutes. And I think, well, and somebody might think, well, isn't your threshold around 4 millimolars? And that's around 60 minutes. Yeah, but this is a race with stochastic. So you're producing a lot and then you recover, which might not clear as much lactate from the blood as it recovers you to produce more, which can make you have a higher mean during a race like this than if it was steady state.
Yeah, we discussed pre-recording as well how we believe they measure this, because in races they don't really stop every lap to do lactate testing, and for my knowledge the lactate sweat test isn't that good. So we believe that they did some kind of training race and stopped every lap to do a lactate test. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's correct.
and I told you, I think actually I have done that at one time, 10 or 15 years back during a training race that we had at least one rider stop and take a lactate every lap during that race just to see how it evolved.
Of course you did.
Tried it all. And then they dive into some training interventions and how that plays out. And they look at high intensity interval training, sprint interval training, and strength training. And the first thing I thought when I read that was, well, what about technical skills training,
Yeah.
both in isolation and also how you integrate that in those other types? They don't mention that at all in the study.
No, exactly. And the strength training intervention, they primarily focused on lower body maximal strength, which also is a limitation for us off-road cyclists or XCO cyclists that uses a lot of upper body strength to maintain speed and, of course, for injury prevention as well. But it is a pretty high upper body uh, pressure from these races.
Yeah, they talk about that in the discussion a little bit, that that's how the research literature looks at the moment, that it's only leg strength focused and there's no real, at least they didn't find. I feel like there is, but they did probably a better search on the internet to see if there is upper body strength connected to cross country, Olympic cross country mountain biking, and obviously not. Which, like you said, it's upper body strength is important for all kinds of things. Now, I would actually add from the things you said, I would say to avoid back pain, which is really common for mountain bikers.
Yeah, the upper body is an antagonist for the lower body. So if the lower body is strong, the upper body should be strong as well.
Absolutely. Uh, when venturing into their discussion, the one thing that I highlighted in early on in the discussion is how they talked about how the courses have changed, and it's technically it's more. I don't know if it is more technical actually. We'll get to that in a few moments, but they say it's a little bit more technical, but more stochastic. It's much more up and down, whereas old school courses, especially if you go all the way back to the 1990s, they were very much like one long uphill, one long downhill, maybe two long uphills with long downhills in between. That's where it's pretty much it. Whereas it's much more up and down and twisting and turning today compared to how it was back then.
Yeah, and they also say that a fast start pacing strategy was consistently observed. And if you have some experience from XCO racing, everyone goes full gas from the start, which, if you think about it, isn't really that smart to do if you're gonna race for 75 minutes. But that's just how it is, and they believe that it's just something that follows from the early days, where it was a start and then straight into a small single track where the possibilities for overtaking other riders were limited, which today the courses are built in a way that you can overtake almost, I would say, like 70% of the course, uh,
And
and that,
also with start loops.
and also with startups, of course, so that a fast start pacing strategy isn't really necessary if you think about it. And if we compare to another episode we did a few weeks ago with the Winter Olympics and biathlon and cross country skiing, we rarely see those guys and girls go all out in the mass start events for 20K or 30K or their skiathlon races. So it doesn't really make sense if you think about it, but it's just the tradition.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a relic from the past where it was more important, and I would say that compared to cross country skiing or or skating on the ice or whatever, it is more important to do a fast start in cross country Olympic cross country mountain biking. But I don't think it's as important as many people make it out to be, which could be a relic from the past. And I think I usually take when people talk about this, I usually take a episode from the past. I don't know which season it was, but it was maybe 2012 or 13 or something like that, when the late Burry Stander had a crash just like on the start line of the XCO race in Val di Sol, and he was like 1 minute behind the second last rider out from the start, and he still managed to be seventh in that race. Of course, he was he was a super great shape back then, but it wasn't like he was somebody who was expected to win by far,
It
and he
wasn't
still.
Nino.
Sorry.
It wasn't Nino.
No, I think actually Nino won that race.
Yeah.
So already then, I think it wasn't as important as many people made it out to be fast from the gun. I think there's a lot of performance or results to be gained from being more thorough with your pacing and really okay, how fast do I really need to go in the start of a cross country Olympic cross country, and then how will I pace both every lap coming, and also of course within the lap, which is a huge thing, knowing where to put the power down during a lap, and when to recover, and where to fuel, and where to whatnot, and that also changes a little bit during the race if you want to attack somebody, how you pace yourself during different parts of the race then as well.
Yeah, I would vote for the rule to include a master start in XCO races, so
Yeah.
that it doesn't get so intense. Only because I suck at starts.
So
That
a rule especially made for you.
yeah, exactly.
But one thing was actually a little bit surprising, which they suggested that looking at the physiological profiles of the cross country riders from the past, from compared to today, is that the VO2 max is really high in both, but the peak power is higher now, so it is more punchy, which is not surprising, and that the older generation were a little bit more time trialers, kind of, so to speak, or like the pure climbers on the road that can go at a high speed for a long time, compared to the cross country riders for today are much more punchier in their profile.
Yeah, today they are better anaerobically compared to the previous generation.
Yeah.
Uh,
And back to a little bit of the technical parts
yep.
of the courses and racing. They say that it's more technical today, and I kind of agree that the courses are more technically demanding than they were in the past. But on the other hand, the bikes are a lot better today, with the dropper post, with full suspension, with better tires, well, bigger wheels, at least if you
29 inch,
compare
yeah.
to the 10 from 50 years ago and back. Um, so, and the courses haven't changed that much. I remember the course in the London Olympics wasn't that much different from the course in Tokyo or Paris when it comes to technical technical degree or a difficulty, but the bikes are a lot better. So
Yeah,
I think peak technical difficulty was probably 10 years ago or something like that, when the courses were really difficult, but the bikes weren't as good as today.
10 years ago was 2016, so I would say more like 15 years ago.
Yeah, could be 10,
Yeah,
15.
maybe, yeah, 2010s around there. The courses changed to more difficult and rough terrain, and the technical bikes hasn't exploded yet as they do today. So during the World Cups on 26-inch wheels, narrow handlebars, no dropper, only front suspension, that was maybe a bit too dangerous, so that the team leaders didn't want the riders on the list of the hospital
Really
list.
list. Yeah, I
Injury
think
list,
a
yeah.
lot of team managers were not that enthusiastic for the development of the courses back then, because it created more injuries than it created excitement for the audience. But
Yeah, and since then the bikes caught up and maybe surpassed the difficulties
yeah,
of the races.
but I can actually get a little bit amused sometimes when I'm out riding, and I go through a section with my 29-inch full suspension bike today. And I think, oh, this is a pretty technical trail. Maybe it's not difficult to go through, but it feels a little bit tricky. And then I remember, but I know I rode this exact trail in 1996 on a 26-inch with 1.9 tires with a 3-bar in them and a small handlebar and just a small suspension fork in the front, and I still made it through. And I can't remember that I thought it was impossible to ride here back then. So I mean, the bikes are getting better, of course, but it wasn't that like the bikes back then were totally worthless. They can still make it through pretty rough terrain.
Yeah, but the speed was probably much lower then.
Of course, much lower. Yeah, for sure.
Uh, do we have anything more from their discussion, or should we go to limitations?
Yeah, I think the if I read directly from the paper here, collectively, these observations highlight the relevance of combining aerobic and anaerobic oriented interval training to replicate the demands observed in competitions. Future studies should evaluate how such interventions translate into actual performance, rather than just focusing solely on isolated physiological indicators. I think that kind of sums up a little bit how research has been, and what we need to which gaps need to be filled in the future. And also to add to that, I think, which is difficult, but how to integrate technical and physical training in, because that is the key aspect of cross country mountain biking.
One thing they included that I thought was a bit funny was that this is from the text. Vaiana et al. And Ducarmo et al. Observed that athletes increased their power output during uphill sections and reduced it on downhill sections.
No,
That's also a mind blown. I have
yeah.
never thought about that.
Yeah, but I mean, of course, in research, you all sometimes have to state the obvious.
Yeah, and in this, I think they did it pretty often. But of course, I know cycling and I know XCO races, so if I hadn't known it and only read this article, it would be an aha moment.
Yeah. Uh, one thing that isn't talked about at all in this article that we talked about, I think, actually was last week's episode of the podcast, which was looking into the torque and cadence profiles during the road cycling monuments, is cadence and torque during cross-country mountain biking, which I think is a pretty big factor. If you look at how mountain biking is ridden, it is a discipline in cycling which has pretty low cadence but still has pretty high power, which translates into it has to have quite high torque values, both momentarily during short bursts and sometimes for a little bit longer duration as well. So I think that is something to look into for research in the future, to look at torque value, because I think that is at least we prescribe that quite a lot in training, the high intensity intervals with quite low cadence, just to be working on the muscle's capacity to produce torque, because that is a little bit the name of the game. It's not just power, it's torque.
Yeah, we do them a lot, but not really that specific to mountain bike or on the race courses. Maybe we should include that more.
Yeah, I think it's both for research in general and maybe for ourselves as well. It's something to look even more into. And I think a lot of the software that helps us as coaches to analyze training and racing data is now better at showing torque values as well, which we can use more systematically to design training programs.
And of course, they in their discussion say that this observation highlights the relevance of combining aerobic and anaerobic oriented interval training to replicate the demands observed in competition, which we talked about with the 5:25 intervals or the 5:10 intervals or 4:10 intervals.
Yeah.
And future studies should evaluate how such intervention translate into actual race performance rather than focusing solely on isolated physiological indicators.
Yeah.
And that means that future studies should look how fast you go on the racetrack and not only the indicators on the physiology.
Absolutely. Because that is the name of the game. And that's also why I think it's important to look at the technical things and how the upper body is used, and the strength capacity and so on in the upper body as well is quite an important factor that hasn't been looked into at all so far.
Now, speaking on strength training, they say that approximately one session every 10 days, you can continue using strength training during the race season by doing one session every 10 days and not lose that much strength. Of course, this was lower body strength training, and another study shows that incorporating lower body strength into the race season allows the maintenance of anaerobic performance without impacting VO2 max negatively. And here as well, they say that it doesn't negatively impact VO2 max, but it doesn't say that it doesn't negatively impact race performance or race results, because those are two very different things. And in the competitive season, you want as good performance as possible, not as high VO2 max as possible.
Absolutely, that is the name of the game. And referencing back to one of our episode, I think a few weeks back, when we talked about strength training in the gym versus strength training on the bike with short, I think it was 7 pedal stroke long sprints. That kind of strength training is, of course, super important to maintain during that kind of strength training on the bike is something actually I think you could do pretty much year round. But the strength training in the gym is a quite big factor during the off-season base training. But at least both you and I try to incorporate some kind of gym work throughout the season during the race season as well. But let's not forget those short sprints. They are maybe the most important strength training you do for your performance on the bike, at least when it comes to pedaling the bike.
And from experience, finding a gym when you're out traveling, racing, it is a pretty big headache and not what you really want to do when you're out traveling. So just to include the on-bike strength training is good enough.
Yeah, at least for the pedaling muscles.
Yeah, yeah,
And then, yeah, the upper body, usually it's quite easy to take care of at a reasonable quality, at least with some calisthenics exercises. So you don't need to find a gym to do it.
no. And as we talked before, a limitation that found in this study is that it is inconsistency in description of participant characteristics. They don't really have uh, a table or what you can say uh, what kind of riders they include. They say tier 3, tier 4, tier 5 riders, but what is that? And is a tier 5 rider a one who starts a World Cup or the top 15 or 20 in a World Cup? Uh, it's hard to know, so you can't really draw conclusions from that. Even if, well, everyone is good, but how good?
Yeah, no, that it's not crystal clear, watertight lines between those tiers. So it's difficult to know exactly. One thing I'd like to add also a little bit back to the which I think actually and at the end of the day still is the most important physiological characteristic of cross-country mountain bikers. It's a high aerobic capacity, and the short burst kind of intervals, the micro intervals with a few seconds on, a few seconds off, they have been more and more popular in the last 10-20 years as well. If we back up 20 years, it was like the doing 30-30 or 15-15. That was pretty much what everybody knew. And those kind of intervals were not that frequently used, at least not compared to today. But there's a plethora of different kinds of micro intervals today that seems to have different effects on the body as well. So I think our knowledge and use of those kind of intervals has really grown a lot in the last 10-20 years, which is not just important for cross-country mountain biking or even cycling. It's great training for all endurance sports and maybe even super important for a lot of other sports as well. But especially for mountain biking, that kind of training is more specific than doing very steady state intervals that have been more traditionally used.
I agree. Uh, well, it's also limited on the female side. Continuously during not just this study, but every study they looked at, it wasn't enough female athletes, female cyclists studied that they could draw any conclusions from it, which is which is a shame. There are many many female riders, but that are very very good. That it would be very nice to see some studies about. So hopefully in the future they include more females as well.
Yeah, and this is not a Olympic cross country specific problem. I think that's a
It's a road
research.
cycling problem as well.
Yeah, no, it's a research problem in
Yeah,
general.
I was kidding.
Yeah, but hopefully that is something that is it's changing, but for sure not at the pace that we might hope.
No. Well, any last words?
It sounds like I'm about to die.
No, not yet, I think.
Hopefully not. No, I don't think I have anything more to add. I think it's although, like we said, this isn't breaking news for us, and I don't think it's breaking news for a lot of people who are have been in as involved in coaching cross-country mountain biking as we have in the last 10 or 20 years, but stating the obvious is also important, and I think it's really interesting and fun to discuss a discipline that we are quite passionate about, and both stem from, even though we've been doing racing in all kinds of cycling disciplines, both of us stem from cross-country mountain biking.
Yeah, and you from the old school 2+ hours, and I from the more modern era.
The contemporary kind.
Exactly, and it's also nice to have studies to reference things to, and not just from logical thoughts and experience as well.
Yeah.
Well, that's it for this week. Hope you enjoyed listening to us talking about cross-country mountain biking.
Yes, thank you for putting up with our discussions yet again.
Yeah, hear from you. You will hear from us next week again. Ciao.
Ciao.
And that brings us to the end of this episode of the D-VELO-P Cycling Training Podcast. For more training tips and deeper dives into performance, you can follow us on Substack and check out our blog on our webpage as well. You can of course follow us on our social medias, Instagram and LinkedIn, and of course Facebook. And if you got any questions or ideas for future topics of the pod, leave a comment below in this episode. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you for listening, keep pushing forward, and we'll see you next time.